At the start of the story, we hear private investigator Patrick Kenzie narrating. He explains that the things we don't often value, like our city, streets, and family, can end up defining who we are. In Boston, people take great pride in their city. It's like their identity and livelihood. Patrick introduces himself, saying he knows most of the people in the city. His name is Patrick Kenzie. The scene shifts to a woman's house surrounded by media. The woman, visibly distressed, pleads, asking what her 4-year-old daughter, Amanda, could have done to deserve being kidnapped. This heartbreaking news is broadcast on every channel. Patrick and his girlfriend Angie watch the news. Patrick is frustrated, seeing so many police officers standing around instead of actively searching for the girl. He wonders if they're just waiting for her to return on her own. Later, Beatrice and Lionel visit Patrick at his home. They reveal they are Amanda's aunt and uncle. Beatrice explains, "We saw your ad in the paper. You're private investigators. Can you help find our niece?" Angie suggests they go to a more established investigator, leaving Beatrice and Lionel confused. Patrick then clarifies, "We're not big-time investigators. We've only handled small cases." Patrick explains that the cases they've handled before were more like children getting lost while playing or losing their way. They've never dealt with a kidnapping case. Beatrice and Lionel assure them it's okay and plead for help. In the end, Patrick and Angie agree to take the case. As they head to Amanda's house, Patrick becomes increasingly irritated by the crowds gathered along the way. He's frustrated, thinking, a girl has been kidnapped, and these people are just standing around. Once they arrive, Beatrice and Lionel lead Patrick and Angie inside, where Amanda's mother, Helen, and her friend, Dottie, are present. Helen confronts them, asking why they're there and telling them to leave. Dottie sarcastically comments that they're just more people pretending to care, like the police and media. Helen and Dottie's harsh words anger Angie, who turns to Patrick and says, "Let's leave. We don't need to take this case." However, in a private moment, Beatrice and Lionel plead with Patrick and Angie. "Please find Amanda. She's like a daughter to us," they beg. Angie becomes very emotional. Patrick then asks Lionel why Amanda's mother, Helen, acted that way towards them. Lionel responds that Helen has a questionable reputation and often has unknown men visiting her house. He adds that Helen spends most of her time having fun at the Fillmore Lounge. Beatrice, looking sad, says that she and Lionel are the ones who take care of Amanda. Otherwise, she fears what might have happened to the child. Later, Police Captain Jack Doyle meets Patrick and asks if he has taken Amanda's case from Beatrice. Doyle comments that Patrick looks very young and shares his own experience. "In my 30 years of service, if a child isn't found within the first day of being kidnapped, the chances of finding them alive are almost zero. And today is the 3rd day." Doyle advises them not to take the case, but Patrick insists they just want to help. Captain Doyle then allows Patrick and Angie to investigate privately and promises his full support. Patrick and Angie visit the Fillmore Lounge to gather information, but don't find anything useful. However, Patrick runs into an old friend, and they sit down to talk. The friend reveals that Helen is a heavy drinker and was drunk until midnight on the night Amanda was kidnapped, accompanied by her boyfriend, Skinny Ray. After leaving the lounge, Patrick and Angie go to a restaurant where they meet 2 police detectives, Remy and Nick. Remy remarks that he didn't expect such a young couple of investigators when Captain Doyle mentioned someone would be coming to meet them. Remy initially thought someone more experienced would show up. Then, Remy and his partner Nick show Patrick and Angie some photos, suggesting that one of the people might be the kidnapper, as they all have histories of kidnapping children. Patrick asks if they have looked into Skinny Ray. Nick, looking confused, asks who Skinny Ray is. Patrick explains that Skinny Ray is Helen's boyfriend, and she was with him at the Fillmore Lounge on the night of the kidnapping. Hearing this, Nick and Remy are surprised and realize Helen lied to them. Remy says he will make her tell the truth, but Nick sarcastically responds, questioning how effective Remy's earlier efforts were. Patrick and Angie then meet a boy named Bubba, who is a drug dealer. Patrick asks if Bubba knows Skinny Ray and Helen or if he has ever sold them drugs. Bubba dismisses them as worthless and insists he only deals in small quantities of drugs, which has kept him out of jail. He adds that if he were involved with people like them, he would be in jail already. Despite his reluctance, Bubba provides valuable information, revealing that Helen works for a drug dealer named Jean-Baptiste. Patrick and the detectives visit Helen's house to question her about Jean-Baptiste. When asked if she knows Jean-Baptiste, Helen admits she has heard of him. Remy reveals they know she used to work for him, to which Helen confesses that she occasionally delivered drugs for him. She then excuses herself, going into another room to drink beer. The others follow, and Remy brings up rumors that someone has stolen Jean-Baptiste's goods. Helen denies knowing anything about it. Nick sits next to her, reassuring her that they aren't concerned about small-time drug addicts and won't hold it against her. Nick, speaking gently, emphasizes their concern for her daughter and their desire to help. However, it becomes clear that Nick has ulterior motives in mind. Nick, frustrated, says Helen should go to jail for lying to them and that they will make sure she stays there. Finally, Helen confesses that she and Ray were supposed to deliver drugs to a place called Nashua. They successfully delivered 4 kilograms of goods and returned to the hotel with the money. Suddenly, the police showed up, so they pretended to be a family, which allowed them to escape. Ray then suggested they tell Jean-Baptiste that the police took the money, while they secretly kept it. They followed through with this plan. Remy asks where the money and Ray are now. Helen reveals that the money is hidden in Chelsea at her place. On their way there, Angie berates Helen for her carelessness, accusing her of not caring about her daughter. Helen just smiles shamelessly. When they arrive at Ray's house, they find him dead. Remy notes that Ray appears to have been tortured before being killed, likely by Jean's people trying to find the money. Patrick points out that Ray didn't even know where the money was, confusing Remy and Nick. Patrick explains that Helen had just admitted she hid the money, not Ray. Annoyed at being lied to again, Remy and Nick confront Helen, who eventually tells them where the money is. After digging at Helen's place, they find a bag full of money. They decide that since Jean-Baptiste wants his money back, they'll return it in exchange for Amanda. They believe Jean kidnapped Amanda in retaliation for the stolen money. As Nick and Remy prepare to meet Jean, Helen tells to apologize to Jean on her behalf. Nick and Remy smile, calling her cunning. Outside Jean's den, they discuss who should go in. Patrick volunteers, reasoning that if Nick and Remy go, Jean will recognize them and might get scared, endangering Amanda. Patrick and Angie go in to meet Jean, offering to return his money in exchange for Amanda. Jean denies having Amanda and insists they return his money. Patrick comes out and explains everything to Remy and Nick, which makes Remy furious. He confronts Patrick, saying, "You took the responsibility to negotiate with Jean and secure Amanda in exchange for the money. But what happened? Nothing. If Jean harms Amanda to get his money back, you'll regret this for the rest of your life." Patrick and Angie return home in a sour mood. The next morning, Angie receives a call from Remy, who informs her that Jean contacted him last night and is now willing to make a deal for Amanda. However, Captain Jack Doyle has learned about the situation and wants to see them immediately. Patrick and Angie head to Doyle's office, where Nick and Remy are already present. Doyle is furious, accusing them of planning a deal with a drug lord behind his back. He hands Patrick a transcript of a recorded call between Jean and Remy. According to the transcript, Jean has instructed Patrick, Angie, Nick, and Remy to go to different locations for the exchange. The deal is set to happen at Quincy Quarry, a remote, mountainous area. They begin planning the operation. Remy explains that, according to Jean's instructions, Patrick and Angie will wait for Amanda on the east side of the quarry, while he and Nick will head to the west side to hand over the money to Jean. Angie, worried, asks if everything will go smoothly. Doyle, reflecting on his own loss, reassures her, "Someone killed my 12-year-old daughter, and I know the pain of losing a child. I won't let that happen to anyone else." Patrick and Angie wait at the top of the mountain in the quarry at night, hoping to reunite with Amanda. Suddenly, they hear gunshots from the other side of the mountain, where Nick and Remy were meeting Jean. Patrick rushes over and finds Remy, who explains that Jean had brought Amanda, but suddenly threw her aside and started shooting. In the ensuing chaos, they killed Jean. Angie, unable to bear the uncertainty, jumps into the water from the top of the mountain to search for Amanda. She finds some of Amanda's clothes but nothing more, and the ordeal causes her to faint. The next morning, she wakes up feeling devastated, fearing that Amanda might be dead. Captain Doyle resigns from his position, and the news channels broadcast reports of Amanda's presumed death. A funeral is held for Amanda, even though her body was never found. The loss weighs heavily on Patrick and Angie. Angie often cries in her room, blaming herself for what happened. Patrick is also deeply affected, frequently reflecting on that night at the quarry and questioning their roles in the tragedy. Amanda's case continues to haunt them, as the absence of her body leaves them with lingering doubts. A few months later, another kidnapping case makes the news, involving a 7-year-old boy. One day, Bubba visits Patrick and informs him that he has tracked down the 3 people Patrick had previously asked him to find. Patrick learns from Bubba about a group of individuals who often kidnap children. Remy, Nick, and Patrick head to the address provided by Bubba. Upon entering the house, they are met with gunfire, and Nick is shot. Patrick sneaks into the bathroom and discovers the body of a child, the same one reported missing in recent news. Overcome with rage, Patrick kills one of the kidnappers. Police arrive shortly after, and Nick is taken to the hospital. Patrick, deeply shaken, is comforted by Angie, who tells him she's proud of him for doing the right thing by stopping the kidnapper. Later, while drinking with Remy, Patrick listens to old stories. During their conversation, Patrick learns that Remy has known Skinny Ray for 15 years. Realizing Remy lied during the Amanda case when he claimed he didn't know Ray, Patrick confronts Angie about it. The next day, they receive the news that Nick has died in the hospital. They attend his funeral, and afterward, Patrick speaks with a police officer who used to work with Remy. The officer reveals that Helen and Ray had stolen money from Jean-Baptiste in June. A week later, Remy was investigating Ray, Helen, and the stolen money within his department. This officer also confirms that the police who encountered Ray and Helen at the hotel were aware of their activities. They're talking about the same hotel where Ray, Helen, and Amanda met. As soon as the family meets the police officers, one of the officers tells Patrick that what's strange is that Jean only discovered her money 2 weeks later. How did Remy know about the money before Jean? After saying this, the officer walks away to speak with Patrick. Next, we see Lionel, who is deeply upset by looking at Amanda's photo. He's heartbroken. During this moment, Lionel remembers an argument he had with Remy over the phone. He wanted to tell Patrick the truth, but Remy threatened him, saying, "If you do, I will kill you." After this, we see Lionel meeting Patrick and Angie at a bar. He explains that one night, after telling Amanda the story, he was asleep when Helen and Ray came home. However, they didn't know he was there. The two of them, drunk, were happily chatting, admitting that they had stolen Jean's money. Lionel then told a police officer named Remy everything, since he already knew him. Remy and Lionel made a plan to take the money from Helen. That night, Lionel picked Amanda up from her house. According to their plan, they were going to exchange Amanda for the money from Helen, so they could get the money and teach Helen a lesson about paying more attention to her daughter. After taking the money from Ray's house, Remy had both the money and Amanda. Nick had known about everything from the start. Lionel then tells Patrick that they gave $15,000 to one of Jean's men and made a deal to kill Jean. They also kept up a fake deal with Corey to mislead Patrick and Angie. Jean's man lied to Corey and brought him here, but somehow Jean got suspicious of us and started shooting blindly. Amanda, who was there, got very scared and started running without thinking. After that, I don't know what happened. Maybe Amanda fell into the water. No one found Amanda's body, but Angie did find Amanda's clothes in the water. Lionel then gets very sad and says, "No one loved Amanda more than I did. I just wanted to teach Helen a lesson so that she could take better care of Amanda." At this point, Remy enters wearing a mask and starts pretending to rob the place. He's about to shoot Lionel, but Lionel recognizes him and begs him not to do it, saying, "I've told them everything." Hearing this, Remy's focus shifts, and the bartender takes advantage of the moment by handing Remy 2 bullets. Despite all this, Remy doesn't die. He runs away from the bar, and Patrick follows him. During the chase, Patrick reaches the roof of a building where he discovers that Remy is dead. Killing a police officer was not a small matter, so Patrick is called to the police station for questioning. Two officers ask Patrick about the incident. Patrick explains everything about Amanda's case. But when Patrick mentions the call transcript, which Captain Doyle had shown him between Jean and Remy, one of the officers points out that there is no such transcript. The officer explains that their department doesn't tap the calls of its own officers. This leaves Patrick feeling quite confused. After all, when Captain Doyle showed him the transcript, neither Nick nor Remy had reacted. What was really going on? So, Patrick decides to visit Captain Doyle's house to meet him. But when he arrives, he finds Amanda there, perfectly fine and looking very happy. At that moment, Patrick understands everything. Amanda never fell into the water. Nick and Remy had saved her and thrown her doll and clothes into the water to make it look like she had. This means Doyle, Nick, and Remy had been working together from the beginning. They wanted to keep Amanda away from Helen because they believed Helen wasn't a good woman and wasn't properly caring for Amanda. They felt Amanda's future was not safe with Helen. Once Patrick understands everything, he asks Doyle, "Did you do the right thing?" Doyle responds, saying that Helen doesn't know, but everything they did for Amanda was the right thing. She'll grow up well in my and my wife's care. We did what was best for her. She'll be safe with us. Patrick then goes to Angie and tells her the whole story. Angie starts crying and begs Patrick, "Please don't tell the police about all this. Amanda is happy with the Doyle family. Please, Patrick, for my sake, don't tell the police. If you do, I'll leave you." Patrick looks at her and says, "I'm sorry, but no matter what, Amanda is Helen's daughter." Just then, the police arrive. Doyle is arrested, and Amanda is taken away from Mrs. Doyle and handed over to Helen. In the final scenes, we see Angie leaving Patrick. Helen is getting ready for a new date, and Patrick comes to Amanda's house to care for her. The movie ends showing that many families, Lionel's, Remy's, Doyle's, and even Patrick's, have been torn apart because of Patrick. But despite everything that happened, Helen still hasn't changed. The ending is very sad, but that's how the movie concludes. So how did you like the explanation of the movie? Let us know in the comments.